Hello out there. I'm BevNET Editor-in-Chief Jeff Kleinman, reaching out to you from my living room to bring this special panel that we hope will be useful to the entrepreneurial community. It's on maintaining and improving the brand-copacker relationship during the COVID-19 crisis. The economic effects of social distancing and stay-at-home orders have created a unique set of problems for food and beverage brands of all sizes. Demands for their products are up, sometimes to the point where buyers are looking to fill spaces with any products they can get. But the act of purchasing them at the consumer end, at least via traditional channels, is now slow and deliberate. Online sales are surging. The demand for many products has stressed distribution channels. The trucking profession has become front page news. At the same time, unemployment is skyrocketing. Money is tightening up, and in many cases, investment is slowing, at least temporarily. With buying cycles tamped down, brands have to make key decisions about innovation, assortments, and inventory. All of these contextual factors for brands lead back to one key relationship: the factories and facilities that produce their goods. Yes, having demand up is great, but the fulfillment of that demand, particularly as it changes and the supply chain cramps, is where the copacker brand relationship becomes of utmost importance. So I've invited three guests here who have deep roots in operations and brand roles, either in running co-manufacturing facilities, aligning those facilities with the brands they service, or helping to find scaling solutions on either end of the pipeline. They also bring deep roots in the entrepreneurial environment to this talk. So I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves and tell us your organization, and then we'll move to questions. And I thank you for joining us, and I thank you for watching. Why don't we start with Liz?
Hi, Jeff. Hi, everyone out there. Liz Meislick, Chief Growth Officer at Fresca Foods. Been in this natural food world for about 20 years as a manufacturer, co-packer, and as a startup brand. So I can really understand and empathize with both sides of the issue and opportunity that we're facing today. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Jeff?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and glad to be here today. I founded JPG Resources 11 years ago after spending 9 years at Kashi, where I was head of R&D, and managed the co-man relationships there as well. And at JPG, we help brands find and manage their contract manufacturing relationships. I also run Snackworks, which is a contract manufacturer here in Michigan. And so, again, like Liz, have a couple of different lenses to this question.
All right. Pete?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for inviting me. This will be fun. But Pete Speranza, 23-year veteran in the food industry, all with General Mills, with the first half of my career deep-rooted, actually, in supply chain engineering and operations. And then the last 8 years, basically the founder and creator of 3-in-1 Ventures, which is the venture arm of General Mills. So to Jeff's point, I have a lot of experience, not just with scale, but also in the entrepreneurial community, and lead a lot of our efforts actually in finding the latest and greatest brands that we feel are important and can be a part of General Mills.
All right. So in setting up this conversation, the most repeated word was communication between the brand and the co-pack and the co-packer. So for my first question, I want to ask you each the guiding wisdom on this area. What's your individual baseline advice for assessing communications and relationships and dealing with weak spots when there's extra urgency and delicacy around the coronavirus crisis? Jeff?
Well, certainly it's a good time to be have good relationships that you've already built for a starting point. But at this point, I would say communicating with clarity and communicating with some lead times is going to be super helpful. And I think, as with any time, but particularly now, communicating with a sense of appreciation for what your partners are also going through now will help you have a productive conversation with your manufacturer or any other vendor.
All right. What are some of the things you want to be communicating?
Well, I think certainly communicating about your demand progression, and a lot of us are experiencing, both on the manufacturing side and the brands, higher demand. So I think planning ahead for that certainly is helpful. But then also communicating around, can you help them be more efficient? Do you need to do a double run so that you can get your inventory up and then allow them to save that cleaning and transition time to go on to something else? So I think having a conversation that cuts both ways, that you're telling them what you need and doing the best you can to get what you need, while recognizing that it's a unique situation for your partners as well.
Liz, one of the things that we talked about, and Jeff brought it up in terms of saving people time in transition, we talked a lot about sort of waste in the system that can exist between brands and co-packers. So is there something at the baseline that can help eliminate that?
Yeah, I think there is a tremendous amount. In fact, it's documented that there's about 40 to 45% waste along the value chain before items even ever reach the grocery store, and then we know another 40% once it reaches our homes. A lot of that waste is due to lack of communication, transparency, and collaboration along the supply chain. Information is power, and so right now, I think it's more important than ever. We're all facing the same uncertainty, and we all have the same interests and issues, which is to minimize risk, to minimize working capital needs, and to maximize the flexibility and availability of inventory to support the highly volatile demand cycles that we're seeing right now. So I think we have a better opportunity than ever to build on those good relationships that Jeff talked about and work in ways that we never have before, being much more integrated, acting as one team, and sitting down, having weekly meetings or more frequent if necessary, to talk about demand, understand where we have opportunities to be more efficient together in terms of how we run. Jeff mentioned double runs, really focusing in on kind of the most efficient SKUs, and maybe not running as much the lower producing SKUs, so that everyone together really has a better view of what's happening on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, so that we can eliminate some of that waste and really produce what is needed right now.
So let me ask one follow-up, Liz. A lot of people, let's say a lot of brands want to do double runs. How good are manufacturers at shifting on the fly to allow the entire scope of their client base to change the kinds of things that they want to produce?
So it really depends. It depends on what items we're talking about and the lead times for those materials. But obviously, our scheduling is completely changing. Whereas most manufacturers want to have a locked schedule for many weeks to be able to buy larger quantities of raw materials, to buy them at a better price, and then to manage to schedule labor more efficiently. Right now, we're all in a situation of just seeing tremendous peaks and valleys in demand and availability. And so what that means is that we have to be much more, I would say, reactive, responsive, and we're buying in smaller quantities and trying to be able to accommodate differences and fluctuations in scheduling needs as much as possible, while also, most importantly, maintaining the safety of our employees, which is obviously everyone's number one concern. The folks that are manufacturing our food, distributing our food, and selling our food are the real heroes right now. Those are the people who are most important in all of this. And so that is the primary concern for all manufacturers. But we are needing to be more flexible and request materials in shorter lots and more frequently than ever before. So what that does is that leads to higher cost, right, in terms of materials and so forth. So, but it comes also at the expense of having to buy in longer lead times when we don't know the demand, and then therefore could end up with inventory of materials that don't get sold through, because we know that as much as demand is spiking now with certain products, there will be a leveling out that will happen, and we don't know when or how much, that what the new normal will be. So really just being much, much more shorter term thinking and how we look at materials and inventory management and scheduling.
Pete, I saw you nodding through a lot of that.
Yeah, totally.
So is there something you want to add?
Yeah, as I thought about your first question, I mean, it comes to two words really that are top of mind right now, and it's all around this hyper proactive. You got to be proactive, right? And then it comes back to creativity. And I think to Liz's point, the gloves are off, right? So all the options are on the table for all.
No, the gloves are on. The gloves are definitely.
Yeah, this is hockey I'm talking about. Yeah, and they, the interesting part is just say on the proactive piece, right? You're in a reactive world, hyper reactive world, but you need to be proactive. And once again, to Liz's point, it's an hourly basis. It's a daily basis that these brands are talking directly to, not just the co-packers, but the ingredient providers, the packaging providers, and then the retailers as well, to understand kind of how they're managing their shelf and their logistics side of things. So it's been it's tiresome, right? But you got to get your team's head around that. This is kind of everything. This is number one priority every day and day out for a while now, and you got to try to systematically at least manage it. But it is a daily grind, somewhat, with those companies and brands, and it's just got to be known that it's going to be a while. You got to get the right cadence of conversation going on, and continue to work through it. And then on the creativity piece is really what you were mentioning as well, which is around, how do you find a win-win-win situation for everyone, right? So how do you look at managing, out of stocks at the shelf, co-packers that want to have more diligence around cleaning and human safety, so they might slow down the lines or not want to change over as often. And then obviously on the brand side is, why don't we just have some focus on like your top churning SKUs and not focus as much on the tail, because that's what consumers seem to be looking for more and more as you go. And there's a lot more retailers telling consumers, hey, you're probably not going to find all your varieties, brands, and sizes, but you're going to get your staples. So we've seen examples where Target or others have been asking for limited SKUs for brands, but the highest selling SKUs, which just flows all the way back to the supply chain and then allows you to get that efficiency and just saving time and energy, right? Because once again, this energy that you're spending on this reactiveness, the more you could at least take some of the alcohol waste out of the system in the short period, the better it will be across the whole supply chain, and everybody will feel like they've won, including the consumer.
Pete, I just want to follow up. How long does it take these efficiencies to become part of the system? So I might say, I want to cut the tail and broaden the core products. How long will it take most entrepreneurial brands to bring in those kinds of orders?
Yeah. This is back to it definitely depends if you're in the fresh space compared to the frozen or obviously shelf stable space, because I think it changes the game. I've heard some good examples here already around double runs and things like that. But if you're in the fresh game, a double run probably isn't as helpful as maybe stocking up on some frozen ingredients that might eventually make it into the fresh item, or materials that obviously have long shelf lives that you can manage and get it in early. So you can be opportunistic, because once again, to Liz's point on the forecast, you don't know the opportunities that's kind of lurking around the corner with the current environment. And you do want to be ready that you can respond quickly if all of a sudden Costco or anybody else asks you to kind of do something unique or interesting because they have a gap that they need to fill because there's another issue in the market. So you got to manage the overall supply chain in a sense of what platform you're actually running, because it does change the dynamics of how you would set it up. So once again, be proactive, but also to your point, to be opportunistic when things show, but not overhang yourself as well if everything slows down, where all of a sudden you're caught with a lot of inventory of something that you don't need. So I think that managing the inventory down from a fresh perspective is easy and relatively fast. But if you're in a shelf stable, you might end up holding some products for a while to cause that efficiency. But your typical core business typically has a higher margin than a lot of your tail. So it could be like I said, a win-win for everybody.
Are there basic adjustments to traditional metrics that any of you is recommending with regard to inventory, or with regard to supply, to advanced buying, or with regard to locking up line time?
Well, I'll jump in real quick on that first. Two things that we're definitely recommending, and one is being a little bit longer on inventory if you do have frozen or shelf-stable products. One reason for that is obviously to take advantage of the upswing. The other reason is to have a hedge against your potential supply chain or your supply chain potentially being disrupted. So, 2 to 4 weeks is what we're thinking at this point. In another few weeks, that could be, you might need to be drawing that back down again. But secondly, we see a lot of young brands that short code themselves. That their product could be 12-month shelf life and they code it 9 because they like it a little bit better at 9 months. But look, at this point in this uncertainty, you need to give yourself as much flexibility as you can. And if your product from a food safety standpoint is good at a longer shelf life, and it's not terrible and inedible or unsellable, you should give yourself a little flexibility so that while you're carrying extra inventory, you've got a longer time to move it if the market shifts under you. So those would be 2 key points that I would make.
Yeah, and Jeff, one quick comment on that as well, just to chime in for a second, is it's on the same vein, and it's all around, if you think about materials, right? There's different expectations, I think, in market now. And you can use some generic materials that you typically would have customized. It could be just lids on cups, or it could be cases and things like that. And I think that's another way of allowing you some flexibility, but allowing your vendors to have some flexibility to maybe give you some generic lids for a while and then go back to custom once they figure it out, knowing they're getting pressure from other retailers or vendors or customers to increase volumes across the board. It's just another option, I think, for entrepreneurs to think about, that what's critical from a branding perspective, and then how are people reacting in market a little bit. If they saw a generic lid all of a sudden on Good Culture, but still the branding was on the front of the cup, I don't think anybody would complain or worry about it at this point, because they're just happy that it's on the shelf.
Liz, you've run plenty of lines. How hard is it to implement those kinds of changes? How much lead time?
Well, it certainly requires a lot of planning, but I think to the extent that the brand and contract manufacturer are working together and very closely with ingredient suppliers, everyone that I've been speaking to these past weeks have been implementing contingency planning, business continuity planning to really preemptively think about all of the potential interruptions in supply chain across every commodity that they purchase on the ingredient side and the packaging side. So a lot of that work is being done, but certainly if those that are listening are not doing that, now's the time to be thinking about kind of a good, better, best, or bad, worse, worst scenario in terms of how long this could last and what materials and packaging elements could be at risk. So anticipating that and working with your suppliers on workarounds such as generic lids, I think that's a great example, are ways to be proactive. And, to Pete's point also in terms of being proactive, there's obviously a lot of fear and worry right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, and none of us knows when this is over. the greatest antidote to fear is action. So taking action, planning, anticipating is incredibly empowering because it puts you in control of what can happen. And again, everyone's in this together. Your suppliers, co-packers depend on you just as you depend on them, and suppliers as well. So everyone's already thinking about this, working on this. So I think there's a lot of options and flexibility that people are building in right now and thinking about how to be adaptive to the changes and limits that might come ahead of us.
Should you expect your co-packer to have some of those solutions at the ready, or is it your responsibility to say, well, look, this is our plan B, can you fulfill it?
I think it's absolutely every brand's responsibility first to think about their own ingredients and materials and working together with their suppliers and with their manufacturers to implement planning, because the best ideas are going to come from all over. So, but the brands should certainly take the lead in thinking about and working on that plan and then bringing in their suppliers and co-mans along the way.
Okay. One of the things that was in the air a lot in the first couple of weeks of this crisis was factories may get shut down, there may be interruptions in service. So the issue of manufacturing redundancy was thrown around a lot. Now, for a lot of brands who may be listening now, the idea of having one co-packer is difficult enough to achieve. So how do I get this redundancy? And if not, how do I improve reliability?
Well, I'll lead again here. There's no such thing as true redundancy for small brands. It just can't really be done because many are too small to the point you make. It's hard enough to have one, and it's hard enough to manage one. But certainly you can make the calls to look at, well, who might be your backup option and begin to establish that relationship, to build a little more confidence that they might be an option if something were to happen with your current supply chain. You should probably do the same with your ingredient suppliers. So redundancy sometimes gets thrown around by people who may not really understand what it means or how difficult it is for small brands to pull off. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're running two plants. It just means that you have a plan and you've established some of the relationships so you can execute the plan. I think that's what it means now. If you haven't done that already, this might be a difficult time to start because people have so much on their plates. At the same time, it doesn't hurt to start doing the best you can to create that backup plan.
Yeah, that actually brings an interesting question. One of the audience questions that we had submitted before this was, if I'm a new brand trying to launch right now and trying to get products made, what are my chances? And how do I build that relationship with a co-packer now? Is that even possible?
I would think it's harder than ever because most co-packers are actually even not allowing any new products to be launched with their current relationships. So I would think that's a relatively hard discussion to have for now. But I do think a little bit to the question before around just reliability and working with your co-pack closely around how do you create a more efficient environment from what they have today. And it might cost a little bit more money to do that and headcount and others, but that's another way of partnering. But for this, if you're a new brand and have a great idea and you're just trying to get in the co-packing world right now, you might have a better chance of figuring out some kind of commercial kitchen that you might be able to get your hands a little dirty and figure it out, because it'd be quite hard, I think, to jump into a co-packer at this point.
Liz?
Yeah, I think if you're a new brand, I agree with what both Jeff and Pete said. As a new brand, right now is an opportunity to really focus on how do you make that product really the best it can be for your target consumers. So now is the time to be really playing with your formulas and exploring that with consumers, getting feedback, before trying to jump in right now to a new co-packer relationship. I think that everyone's trying to manage downside risk and really buckling down right now in the near term. That will change. This is temporary. And this industry has seen tremendous resilience and growth through even the most difficult economic periods, including the Great Recession. So innovation has been the driver of growth in this industry and will continue to be, including that from new brands. So there will be the opportunity in the near future, but for right now, it's an opportunity to continue to tweak. Every product can always continue to be tweaked. So I would say focus on that for now.
So if you're in manufacturing right now, if you're a brand that's basically been trying to introduce innovation, and we know that buying cycles are kind of out the window. At the same time, demand is way up. Is it possible to get innovation into the marketplace and have it work? Or would you all recommend against that kind of introduction of the new?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a shot at that. I mean, we have some brands that are launching some new innovation over the next 3 to 6 months that still feel pretty confident they should be able to get it on shelf and feel comfortable with that. But in general, because of the consumer really going to the staples and trying to just get what they think they need, I would say you're not going to get a lot of probably trial. And obviously, you can't do a lot of sampling of a new product, especially if it's a little bit of a new to the world product and not just a line extension or a brand expansion or something. But so I would personally hold off, and knowing you can explore higher volumes on your core businesses and just kind of go for the ride a little bit. Now, retailers are kind of shaping that as well because they're basically taking that off the table for a lot of them. So I think that's going to just naturally happen. But obviously, there's a lot of circumstances, or some, that it could work out, or maybe there's a direct-to-consumer path, right, that you could go that's a little bit more virtual, as long as you can get to the supply, right, would be another way of maybe changing your strategy off the cuff. But it's a tough environment to launch a new product, especially new to the world, and then think consumers are going to naturally find it when they're just trying to find the staples, and then they're going to, you get feedback enough to actually understand kind of where you're going next with it.
And doesn't that also, Jeff or Liz, speak to the sort of instability that new brands can bring to the marketplace? That they're often not as financially stable, so it's harder to build up a relationship with a manufacturer if you're so dependent on innovation?
Well, yeah. I think right now, to Pete's point, the retailers aren't wanting it anyway. So who are you launching this to, and how is it getting out there? So, I mean, I think that everybody needs to be looking at innovation for September and beyond, because there's going to be some sort of normal reestablished at some point, and we don't know what that's going to look like or exactly when or how it's going to play out. But we do need to be thinking for the future amidst all this short-term emergency planning and everything we've talked about so far. The flip side of that is when normal comes back, whatever that normal is, you have to be ready to win then too. And if you've shut down your innovation and you're not doing anything, well, how are you going to fill your pipeline, and how are you going to launch for your Q3, Q4, January 21 launch cycles? So that's the difficult thing right now, but it probably means you need to be doing the benchtop work, the planning, the communication, all that kind of building. I mean, there are some co-mans who have capacity. I mean, Snackworks, we happen to have just built a new line, which was, in retrospect, terrible timing. But because it's not just supporting what we already do. There's other plants that do have capacity. What they don't want, what we don't want, speaking as a manufacturer, is stuff that doesn't really fit, stuff that's really a flyer. Right now you want to, if you're going to take on extra work, you want to believe it's going to turn into something. So I think up and down the chain, from retailers to suppliers to vendors, co-mans, everybody wants to know that if I'm going to take time to work on something now, it should be valuable. and you should trust the party that you're going to invest that time and effort into.
All righty. Liz?
No, I mean, Jeff said it beautifully. I agree with everything he said. I think that innovation will come back around, but I do think that right now, and perhaps in the leveling out or sort of recovery from this, I do think we're going to see a different behavior around how brands manage their businesses and grow. There has been tremendous, I would say, support, encouragement by many investors to continue to grow top line at all costs. There are plenty of investors out there that say grow top line, that profitability and margin aren't as important as top line growth. I think that's going to change. And I think that when we look at innovation in particular, it costs, every new item that you launch costs a tremendous amount of money, from the ingredients and packaging, finished goods inventory, slotting fees, marketing fees associated with launching a new item. So I think there's going to be a new level of rigor by brands, by investors, by retailers, by manufacturers that goes into selecting which items will grow. Innovation, as I said before, will always be a tremendous engine for growth. But I think that growth at all costs, that era is over.
Don't some of the things that we've been talking about, though, aren't they going to impact brand margin already? The cost of goods going up because you're buying shorter amounts, the cost of runtime. So how do we work with our co-packers to, I say we, not owning anything, but how do brands work with their co-packers to ease that kind of financial hit right now?
Yeah, I think, yep. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
I think that's where, again, really allocating cash and people time right now to managing existing and optimizing the efficiency of existing business in the very short term, certainly in the next 30 to 60 days, is incredibly important all up and down the value chain. So they're, again, investing in trying to create new manufacturing processes or buying new ingredients and materials for items, that are brand new to the world, brand new to the market right now, I think is a poor use of cash and time. Certainly, again, thinking about and developing benchtop concepts around innovation is great, but the way in which we can, again, reduce that waste throughout the supply chain, maximize everybody's efficiency, minimize working capital requirements, and therefore preserve cash in a very important time, is to really be focused and leaning into the things that are really productive, the items that are very productive, and doubling down on those from an investment standpoint, from an inventory standpoint.
Now, everyone is looking at building cash flow, saying cash is tight, and that cash is needed to get product made. So I want to ask, there's a lot of discussion out there of, well, just ask your co-packer for better terms. And I'm wondering, what role should the co-packer play in helping brands build cash flow back into their equation?
Well, I would say,
go ahead, Tom.
Liz said it well earlier, that right now everybody is cash aware and is looking to reduce risk. I don't know that too many contract manufacturers are going to be wanting to take on extra risk on behalf of their brands. Certainly, many are probably not going to think that's their role. I think that extra cash probably should come from your investors and your lenders. But also, I would make the point to your earlier question, there may be a little bit more cost right now because of the rush or because of extra ordering or whatever. But there's also less money required to promote brands that are on shelf and all of those sort of things. So there is a cash flow impact for brands for sure. but I'm not sure the co-mans are the right place to look. Now, I would say the conversation opens up a little bit more. If you have a long, positive relationship with your co-man, you've been a good payer, they trust you, you've filled that bank, then you might get somewhere with that conversation. Or in the case of saying, hey, how do we help each other out? Can I help you be more efficient? Maybe we do a double run because it's good for both of us, but can you let me pay that in 2 tranches and spread out the cash impact a little bit? If you have trust and a relationship with your co-man, that conversation might go your way. So I think there's a lot of context around that, but for a lot of brands, calling up your co-man and saying, hey, I want you to float me for a while here, more or less, probably not going to be super well received.
Yeah, I was going to jump in just for a second. It starts with empathy with everybody, right? So yeah, if you're understand what they're going through as well as what the company is going through, and knowing these brands are small and don't typically have just a co-pack relationship, they actually have a partnership type of relationship. And then if you look at just opportunities across that, and to Jeff's point around look at efficiencies, or this is back to talking to retailers about maybe cutting the tail out because it really helps your co-packer manage their overall costs. But I think there could be a give and take in a few areas. One would be around who owns the cash flow for certain things like ingredients, packaging, and other things that go in line. Sometimes co-packers own everything to a finished good, and then you sell it, and then you can give the money back. Some are brands, some own some of the ingredients or some of the packaging. So, especially these incentives that are in place over this week, I mean, it might allow the brands to actually support some of that cash flow and not the co-packer, and switch it a little bit to just hold some inventory and other things, knowing you'll eventually obviously get paid back. I also think if you think about raw ingredients as well, things that are coming out of the ground or things that are coming from animals, that spigot doesn't turn off, right? The season's happening where there's a harvest or where there's milk to be coming to the table. So I think being opportunistic in that space for both the co-packer and the brand is something back to this proactive conversation around, could we find different lower rates, because now we're going to look a little bit wider on who has milk supply, because we know there's a glut of milk out there, and things like that. So that I think there are some opportunistic things, but as long as you work as like we're coming from the same side, I think it could work out quite well for everybody.
So are these things like combined forward buying? So they, if you're able to get a loan as a brand, you're able to possibly put that into helping a co-packer purchase raw materials?
Yeah, I mean, some of our brands, buy their own raw materials, right? Or their own ingredients. So then they can take and leverage their buying power and just hold it for the co-packer, so the co-packer doesn't feel the effect of the change in their cash flow. Because you do worry about the co-packer and all the different folks that they're managing. Are they getting paid from everybody across the board, right? So you just got to make sure that they don't run out of cash themselves, and that would obviously put your business in a pretty bad spot. So it is a balance of the situation, and you hope that you've got a tight enough relationship, to Jeff's point, that you could actually have those discussions with them to really understand where they're at today. Because you don't want to think they're okay and then find out 2 weeks from now that they're not, because they had other riskier business that they've been managing. So you'd rather know that up front, so they can either try to help them in ways to like holding inventory yourself or other things. But back to this proactive and not getting surprised is probably the biggest concern.
Packaging is a big part of the process, and brands are trying to optimize for e-com right now. Are a lot of the relationships we're discussing here, are they applicable on packaging supplies and packaging manufacturing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the inventory is tied up in packaging, right? Because of the large volumes that one typically has to purchase and the long lead times associated with producing packaging. So absolutely, those rules apply, and I think that's the example that Pete gave is a great one, and that the area of packaging can be an area where brands can maybe take the lead in investing. And I would say too, to that end, the focus that we've been talking about this whole time is really key. You see, consumers are buying less frequently and larger sizes, right? So having a lot of 1 ounce packs of anything probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now. So just really prioritizing the packaging that you're purchasing, leaning in harder on things that are in your larger sizes at the expense of smaller sizes. And again, your hero SKUs as opposed to the lower producing SKUs. And then partnering with your packaging suppliers to really be able to understand where they're at, have the same empathy for them, and be able to be as efficient as possible with them, with the co-packer, and with your retailer.
What's all of your assessment of the ability of manufacturers to handle these changes with regard to packaging, with regard to new shipping modes? How much lead time do I need to make these kinds of adjustments?
I think that's going to vary a lot, Jeff. I think most co-packers, unless they're already slammed, I mean, if your co-man is already to the max, they may not want to have that conversation. But most co-mans right now understand that this is an opportunity where they can make more money by taking on as much business as they can, and they want to help in all circumstances anyway when there's a sale to be had. So I think most of the time it's not that hard, but it depends. I mean, certain operations, a size change is a big deal and involves tooling and other things, and other times it's a machine adjustment. So again, that comes back to having the conversation, being open, and as Liz and Pete, I think both said, having that planning and proactive conversation with your co-man instead of, certainly don't just send them new film or a new cup size and say, hey, run this for me now.
Look to increase volume first as a way of building cash flow, just down the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How can I get the line time I need when everyone wants more of it?
That's a great question. And I think it all comes back to relationships again. I mean, partly it's scale. Look, if you're the most important customer at a co-man, you're going to have their attention right now, obviously. But for the smaller players, look, co-mans are humans too. The people who run them, and they make human-based decisions. It's not always about the dollar. It's partly about, look, this customer has been a great customer to work with. So there's part of this being proactive, having your act together, being easy to work with, having that history. Both come into play, and we always advise our brands at JPG, you should do your best to be the favorite customer of your contract manufacturer. You may not be the biggest, but you can be the favorite. You say thank you once in a while, you show appreciation, you try to plan, you do things the way they ask.
Go ahead, Pete, please.
No, I was just going to highlight that the same thought process. I mean, it's back to just relationship-based business, right? And it does come back to, if you can early on shed light, like, hey, I can maybe wait an extra week before I need to produce, or I can go to generic lids, or I can do other things to help you guys out. And I know you're having a tough time maybe filling your head count for second shift. So maybe I can move to a larger pack size so it's easier for you guys to manage. Those are all, I think, just amazing conversations that everyone should have with their co-packer, even if it's just, thinking about failure modes down the road and just saying, all right, what are the 2 or 3 solves we would have if all of a sudden I ran out of packaging? And there's a good chance people would be like, well, get a generic one. And then it's like, okay, well, we should maybe start thinking about a generic lid on hand, at least having that where the brand actually might pay for that, but have it on hand, and we'll figure out how to use it later on if we don't use it. But at least that's the thinking with the co-packer on trying to do a win-win. Because if they have someone come to work, sick or they're worried about a shift that's contaminated or something, I mean, it will instantly change your life. So we gotta always be the proactive, but also thinking through those failure modes and then saying, what can I help my co-packer with? Knowing that's your lifeline, and trying to be flexible as flexible as you can.
I just want to emphasize, thank you, Pete and Jeff. I think what you both said is just absolutely perfect. And, now's the time. We are all in this situation together. Now's the time. If that relationship with your co-packer isn't as good as you want it to be, now's the time to make that possible. Because showing that empathy and thinking about proactively how you can help them solve their problems, because their problems are your problems, and really be proactive with them, you're going to come out of this with a better relationship. I think that that's to me, the really inspiring part of this whole difficult situation that we're in together, is that I think there's an opportunity here to be even more collaborative, more transparent, and more communicative than ever before, to build stronger relationships with our partners and our vendors and suppliers and customers than we've ever had. And being proactive with each other, empathetic, and planning together is a way to do that.
Are there examples that any of you have seen thus far of that taking place?
We've certainly seen brands make good efforts, and I think it is helping. Without naming any names, we certainly have some brands who I think are doing an excellent job of that right now, and are reaching out, and sometimes with our team, sometimes on their own, but who are talking to their manufacturing partners and their key supply chain folks about that forward planning. So it is happening. I think it happens with brands who have that little bit higher level of awareness, which often comes from having advisors like Pete or others in the industry who can help coach them along. But some people are just good at that too. I mean, there are certainly brands out there who have that ethos that shines through to their whole supply chain and their employees. And if that's the way you are, you're probably getting some payback on that during this time.
So one of the things we hear about is this idea that we're in the fog of war. There's a lot of militaristic language out there. I wonder, you hear about unknown unknowns in war. And I wonder if we could think about what kind of challenges that we haven't discussed you might see laying out there in these relationships that our entrepreneurs should take away and be cognizant of as they look to plan.
I think the biggest unknown is timing, right? And we have sort of talked about that, but that I think is the most important one here, is that we cannot anticipate how long this is going to last. No one can. And so that's where thinking about short-term, medium-term, long-term, and kind of bad, worse, and planning ahead for that, and thinking through if the worst should happen, my product, the ingredients to make my product are not available, or I cannot get inventory, or I cannot get cash. I mean, just thinking about all those eventualities and how do you plan around those, against those, for the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months is really key. That's I think the biggest risk for all of us is just the time, how long this will last. Because even when we all return to our quote unquote normal lives again, nothing will be normal. There's going to be a period of time for everything to settle out and adjust to a new normal. So it's important to plan for not just the time kind of that the coronavirus crisis is going on, but the period after that everything has to settle back into its place.
Yeah. Scary.
I think, sorry. I keep
Please.
Yeah, and I also think the intensity that's going on right now will be hard to kind of keep up, right? And it's around diligence more than it is around anything else. And you can call it communication, you can call it planning, you can call it proactiveness and all that stuff. But I think, to Liz's point, knowing the timeline is unknown, can these brands stay at this high level of alertness to make sure they maintain the high quality, the good service, to make sure everybody's obviously protected from a personnel standpoint. it goes back to anything, right? You're focused. Like the last 2 weeks has been crazy focus, right? It's just the longer it goes, some company, some brand will stray a little bit, and it won't do anything but, put them in a weird situation, right? Because they didn't follow up, or they wasn't proactive with the copacker because they thought they were actually going to do something, and then you realize you ran out of materials or whatever it might be. So, that's to me is how you got to create a muscle to stay at this high level of alertness, which is hard to do.
All right. Well, good luck, everyone, in staying strong, staying at that level of alertness, and staying safe. And I hope all your teams are able to do that. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again for more conversations. And if there are further questions from the audience out there, I'm happy to forward them on to this wonderful team of experts. Thank you all so much.
Hey, thanks for watching. Hit subscribe and ding that bell.